For the second year in a row now, Apple has changed the mobile filmmaking game by adding Apple ProRes Log onto the iPhone. And while even though I have full-frame industry-level mirrorless cameras, after shooting ProRes Log over the past few weeks on the new iPhone 16 Pro, it still blows my mind how close the footage looks. The time where iPhone footage can look a bit clinical or amateur is now definitely a thing of the past, as the right settings, in-camera setup, and editing knowledge can really take your videos a long way. So with that being said, today I'm going to run you guys through how I set all those things up. Now, before we jump into this, if you guys are looking for a more photocentric setup, check out this video right here on the top right corner. I also just want to preface that even though I'll be using the new iPhone 16 Pro in today's video, as long as you guys have any iPhone that can shoot Apple ProRes Log, so pretty much from the iPhone 15 Pro and up, you'll still definitely be able to follow along and copy these settings. So with that all out of the way, let's jump into our camera settings and get into today's video. All right, so we're inside our settings now, and of course, the first thing we're gonna jump towards is our camera section. Right after that, we're gonna go down to record video, and here's where you can see the different resolutions and frame rates that are offered to us. So as you can see, I like to keep mine at 4K at 30 FPS because most social media platforms play video back at 30 FPS, and that's where most of my videos personally go. But of course, if you like that cinema movie style look, there's also 4K at 24 FPS. But the reason why I like to keep it also at 4K at 30 FPS is because as we go down here to the next setting, it says show PAL format. And if you turn that on, you see that we have a couple more options. And that's because in different regions of the world, video is played back at different frames per second, especially when we're talking movies and cinema in that sort of realm. So as you can see here, in Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America, videos are played back at 25 FPS and not 24. So when I'm traveling, I don't want to be having to always remembering to toggle this on and off. So I just keep it at 4K at 30 FPS. And even if I want to slow it down, say if I'm working at in a 24 frames per second in my edit, I still have the option to tone it down to about 80%, and it gives a nice, smooth, but not quite slow motion effect that I actually quite like. So next thing when we go down is you want to make sure you have enhanced stabilization turned on. And this is one thing that has always amazed me about iPhones, especially in recent years, is especially with small cameras, you can really feel micro jitters and even the smallest steps when you're filming with it. But the iPhone does a really good job of minimizing that, and I think the stabilization looks really good, especially for a tiny camera like this. So you want to make sure you have that turned on. Next thing you want to scroll down is I actually want to keep action mode lower light turned off, just because I personally like the stabilization on the iPhone, and I don't think that in lower light it affects my footage that much, so I like to keep that off. I also turn off HDR video just because I don't really like that HDR. It kind of looks a little sharp and a little too clinical for me, which is the whole point of even why I shoot on ProRes Log to begin with. So right below that, we have auto FPS, and I actually want to keep that off just because, as you can see in the bottom of what it says, it will reduce the frame rate to improve low light video, and we don't want that. I don't want my videos suddenly going from 30 FPS to 24 FPS mid-shot. That would look really terrible. So lastly, the last two final settings right here, lock camera and lock white balance. You want to make sure you have both of those turned on because, of course, I want to manually be able to select which lens I'm using and not have the camera adjust, say, what focal length I'm using or what white balance, as that will look really weird with that changing mid-shot, and it would just kind of completely ruin whatever shot I'm shooting at the time. So after we have all these things taken care of, we want to scroll back and we want to hit record slow-mo next, right below record video. And I personally don't shoot slow motion that much, but especially now this year with the iPhone 16 Pro, with it having 4K at 120 FPS, I can potentially see myself shooting that more. So of course you want to have that turned on at 4K at 120 FPS. So right after we go back to here, the next setting is record cinematic. And I barely touch cinematic mode to begin with, just because I don't like that artificial depth of field. I'm sure in the future it will get better and better and better, but for now, I'm not a big fan of it, especially since I'm used to looking at more natural depth of field shot on, say, a more professional mirrorless camera. So I keep it at this. Of course, you can always bump it up at 4K, but I don't really touch it to begin with. So we'll go back. Next, you want to go down to formats, and this is where we have some settings right here, and we want to scroll all the way down to video capture, because all these, of course, you see these settings up here, they're more for photography, and today this video is more of a video centric camera setup. So we want to come down here to video capture, and the big thing you want to turn on is Apple ProRes. So we have that turned on, and then right below that, when we have ProRes encoding, you want to click that and make sure it's on log and not HDR, since we want to make sure that we're able to shoot, of course, Apple ProRes Log on our iPhones. All right, so we go back here into our formats, jump back into our camera, and then next thing we want to work on is, of course, our preserve settings right below the formats, actually. And I mentioned this in my photography guide as well. I have majority of these turned on just because it's actually a huge hack that helps you save so much time when you're actually shooting, because you can actually save your settings that you already baked into your camera app even after you say you close the app or you're not shooting photos or videos or whatever. And that saves you so much time because you don't have to open up your camera app every time and redo all your settings before you take a clip. So as you can see, you can look down here. I have majority of these turned on, and I advise you guys to do the same. So go back to the camera right here, and lastly, we want to focus on the composition section right over here. And the two things that you want to make sure you have turned on are your grid and your level, and I'll explain why. The grid, of course, you have your rule of thirds grid. It really helps with composition and framing, so definitely want to have that turned on. And leveling, you want to make sure you have that turned on too, especially if you're using the 0.5 wide angle lens. Because it's such a wide field of view, it sometimes may be hard to level out your shot, so you do want that extra level of assistance there. All right, so we're inside the actual camera app now, and the first thing, of course, we want to do is, I'm going to pretty much go from top to bottom, but we want to turn on our Apple ProRes Log right here. And boom, you see that pop up, and if you've never worked with log footage before, this might look really weird to you, just because it looks all grayed out and mushy, and it just doesn't look good all together. But this is actually what we want, because what Apple has given us now with the ability of shooting Apple ProRes Log is for us to bring back all that contrast and saturation to our own liking in post-production, rather than letting the phone bake it in and do it for us. So it really broadens the capabilities of adding a real stylized look onto our footage. So next thing, if we're going to stay on the top left corner right here, we want to click this little exposure meter right here. And if you've ever worked with, say, log footage from a mirrorless camera, you typically know that it's advised that you want to overexpose your footage slightly, about 1 stop or 1.3 stops, somewhere around there. But the great thing about iPhone footage is that you don't really have to do that. You can just kind of keep it at 0 and just expose it normally, and you still retain all the highlights and shadows, and you still have all that dynamic range you can work with in post. So I really like that. It really smoothens out, and it's one less thing I have to worry about when I'm shooting, and we all love that. So next thing I want to highlight is, now that we turned on ProRes Log, you see that there's this max time that turned on right here, and it's only 8 minutes. And this is one downside I actually think comes with Apple ProRes Log right now, and especially now because with the iPhone 16 Pro, you can actually shoot up to 4K 60 using Apple ProRes Log. But as you can see with the pop-up right here, it's only supported when it's recorded to an external storage device. And I recently bought this little SSD clamp that basically connects to the MagSafe to the back of the phone. And while it does work, especially once you connect a good Thunderbolt cable to it, what I personally feel like it does is it kind of takes away the ease of use and the minimalism of shooting with an iPhone. So I really hope that in future iterations of the iPhone that they really find a way to compress the footage of ProRes Log so that you can shoot in these formats without having it eat up all of your phone storage. And eventually, of course, you're gonna have to add a whole nother hard drive or SSD to the back of your phone in order to access these features. So we're gonna turn it back here to 4K 30 FPS and turn back on Apple ProRes Log. And next thing I want to kind of highlight is if you hold down the screen of anywhere of your subject, there is this AE/AF lock. And what this does, it does two things. Of course, it locks your focus, and in video, it's especially important. So say, for example, I want to just focus on my tripod leg in the back. As you can see here, of course, the camera now is all blurred out. But if that's the focus, we want to do a nice kind of little panning shot right here. You see it stays in focus, and you don't want the camera hunting focus whenever you're targeted or you're focused on a subject. So next thing is, of course, exposure too. So say during a mid shot, say we're doing the same shot right here. You want to make sure that your exposure is not jumping up and down because that looks really bad, in my opinion. So that's what this tool also helps it do. So the last thing I kind of want to highlight is also, of course, if you see on the very bottom here, you have all your focal lengths that represent the 3 lenses on the back. And of course, you have your 0.5, your 1x, 2x, and 5x. And pretty much with the exception of the 2x, you never want to shoot outside of the 0.5, 1x, and 5x, because unlike actual mirrorless cameras and having a zoom lens where when you actually zoom the lens, it changes the actual focal lengths. What the iPhone does is you're actually just cropping into your image, and we really don't want to do that. If we want to do any type of cropping, of course, we want to do it in the edit ourselves. So even if, and I mentioned before the 2x is literally just a crop of the 1x. So I try to stay with that, away from that if possible, but luckily if I want to telephoto shot, since I have the iPhone 16 Pro, we have this 5x camera, which has been awesome to use. So especially even now with the new iPhone 16 Pros, now that you have the new rocker button, you can even use the rocker button to kind of zoom in and out like this. I personally wouldn't recommend, especially using anything outside of the set focal lengths and shooting in anything in between like this, say, I don't know, 1.4x or whatnot. So definitely a good rule of thumb to remember. All right, so we have our clip imported now onto our editing software of choice, which for me is Adobe Premiere Pro. And if you have never worked with log footage or just want a quick and easy way to bring back that color and saturation with just one click and don't really want to think too much about it, I have a free Apple ProRes Log to Rec 709 conversion LUT linked down below in the description that can really help bring your footage about, I'd say 80 to 90% of the way there back, so you don't have to say, it saves so much time in your edit. So that's what I'm going to be using right now. So to do that, I'm just going to slap on an adjustment layer right above the clip. And once we're inside, of course, the color tab of Premiere Pro, we're going to go into the creative section and put that Apple ProRes Log to Rec 709 conversion LUT right on top. And boom, as you can see, I would say this clip is almost 90% of the way there, and we only need to make some minor adjustments from here on out. So we're gonna go into our basic corrections and want to make sure we have our clip highlighted, and just want to bring back up the shadows a little bit. Maybe bring down the highlights. And one interesting thing about Apple ProRes Log that I don't see from log footage from other cameras is that the white balance is not, I would say, as flexible, if for lack of a better word, especially if you mess with the tint. I feel like even if you mess with it a little bit, it kind of really makes a drastic change to the clip that which we don't want, which probably emphasizes the point even further that it's important to have that lock white balance setting set in your camera settings before you start shooting, so that your camera can set the white balance properly and not adjust it or have it fluctuate mid-shot, so that we don't have to really mess with it much when we're in the edit as we are now. So I would say at this point, I'm pretty happy with how the clip already looks. I do kind of feel like there's maybe some greens in the shadow / mid-tone area that I'm not very happy with. So I'm just gonna come up here and there you go. I'm not gonna try to mess with it too much. Just add a slight red / magenta tint to it. And we're just gonna play that from the top. And there you have it. It's crazy to me that this type of footage is coming from an iPhone now, as I feel like I could easily match up footage shot on this to say something shot on my Sony ZV-E1, and unless you're really paying attention, you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So it's just crazy to me because log footage like this used to be typically reserved for higher end mirrorless cameras or even cinema cameras, but it's slowly making its way down the food chain to now where it's available onto our phones. Well, that pretty much wraps up today's video. As always, I hope you guys were able to learn something and are able to implement these settings onto your iPhone so that you guys can shoot some amazing footage straight out of your pockets as well. If you made it all the way to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And if you like what you're seeing and you're new around here, feel free to drop a subscribe if you haven't done so already, as it'd mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You're all amazing, and take it easy.